and welcome to Global Newsmakers in the Age of COVID, Public Citizens Briefing Series with thought leaders working to end the global pandemic. My name is Peter Maybarduke. I direct Public Citizens Access to Medicines program. We have been fighting since the first days of the pandemic to end it and to fight for vaccine access for everyone, everywhere. It's been 6 months since Margaret Keenan, 91 years old, resident of the United Kingdom, became the first person to receive a COVID vaccine. And while the United States and other wealthy countries have made great progress in their national vaccine campaigns, the vast majority of the world's people still lack access to safe and effective vaccines, still lack a path to safety and a path out of the pandemic. Today, we will be joined by Representative Pramila Jayapal, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, who recently led a letter to President Biden with many of her congressional colleagues, calling for a much more ambitious United States response to the global pandemic, and co-leader of the NOVID legislation introduced today with Representative Krishnamurthy to expand vaccine manufacturing on an urgent basis and other solutions to end the pandemic. But first, we will hear from a panel of leading experts on the production of mRNA vaccine, a tool widely believed to be key to ending this pandemic and preparing the world against future threats. Public Citizen recently published a report with engineers at Imperial College entitled "How to Make Enough Vaccine for the World in 1 Year." The report is the first to publicly describe mRNA production processes, costs, and materials, and proposes establishing facilities in 6 months to begin rolling out doses in the subsequent 6 months, 55 production lines in 14 retrofitted facilities worldwide to reach 8 billion doses in a year's time and make up the vaccine shortfall. We're joined now, we're going to go to our panel. We're joined by Mrna Buissonniere, Senior Advisor of Resolve to Save Lives, an organization headed by former Director of the Centers for Disease Control, Tom Frieden, and a longtime ally of our Access to Medicines community. Resolve to Save Lives works with governments around the world to help them implement evidence-based strategies to find, stop, and prevent disease threats, with a particular focus in the past 18 months on COVID-19. We're also joined by James Krellenstein, co-founder of Prep for All. Prep for All is an HIV advocacy group focusing on COVID since the beginning of the pandemic, writing in the pages of the New York Times and elsewhere how to hit hard, hit fast, and expand mRNA production to save many lives globally. And by Zain Rizvi, law and policy researcher with Public Citizen, the author of our new report, co-author with engineers at Imperial College, How to Make Enough Vaccine for the World in 1 Year, and of a number of other reports since the beginning of the pandemic that have been influential in helping people understand the public funding behind vaccines and options to scale up production. So we'll have this panel for the first 25 minutes roughly here. Please feel free to prepare your questions, drop them in the Q&A, or raise your hand. Questions for our mRNA experts, and then questions for Representative Jayapal, to whom we will transition at 11:30. So the first question to Mrna. Mrna, thanks so much for being with us. You've been in the access to medicines field for quite some time. Where do you think global efforts at vaccination stand today? What are some of the key challenges and consequences of lack of vaccine access globally now during the pandemic?
Many thanks, Peter. You mentioned that it's been almost 6 months since the first person got vaccinated, and another number is sticking in my head. It's the one of the proportion of vaccines which have been administered in low and middle income countries. If you look at high income countries, they have administered almost 44% of the world's doses so far. Low income countries have administered 0.4%. Now, this statistic, which is shocking in and of itself, has not changed in many months, which I think speaks to the inequity in distribution globally. And this situation is unlikely to change in the short term. We are looking at a dry patch ahead for low and middle income countries at a time where we're seeing rising curves in Africa, for instance, Look at the continent of Africa, a population of 1.3 billion people. Only 31 million people have received at least one dose. And the number of deaths reported last week increased in 3 out of 6 of the WHO regions, Africa, the Americas, and the Western Pacific. So increasingly, we see a two-track pandemic. One, where people are going back to the movies and think the pandemic is behind them, and others where people are mourning their loved ones. We see one where high-income countries are vaccinating their youth while healthcare workers around the world are not yet vaccinated. Now, this inequity, this inequitable distribution of vaccine has allowed the virus to continue spreading, and in so doing, increasing the chance of variants emerging that renders vaccines less effective. So it is unsustainable and unrealistic that we think we're going to be solving the current situations of vaccine scarcity and inequity by simply doing more of the same. And we need to confront scarcity head on. We need straight away to think about how to increase output, productions, and think about distribution of production with mRNA vaccines, which I'm sure the other panelists will be talking about.
Thanks so much, Maureen. So the world has a severe vaccine shortfall. We don't anticipate having enough vaccines in the short term to meet global demand, which is something that we can also discuss, why many of the vaccine production projections are overly optimistic. James Kullenstein, co-founder of Prep for All, you've been an advocate for mRNA production as a path out of the pandemic. Why messenger RNA? What are the advantages of the technology?
Thanks, Peter, for the question. So we've been advocating actually for increased mRNA vaccine production capacity internally at some of the administration science advisors since December. And that the reasons for choosing mRNA are really actually quite clear. mRNA vaccines are really distinct in the way that they are produced from every other type of COVID vaccine that we have today, in that they use a technology, a production technology, that is what we call cell-free. It doesn't have to involve so many manipulations in living cells. What this allows us to do is much more rapidly scale production compared to other vaccine technologies. And that has been actually come to fruition in actually how we are accessing vaccines here in the United States and in many higher income countries. Right, in February of 2020, when we started this pandemic, there was no commercial mRNA vaccine production capacity anywhere in the world. We built all of the mRNA vaccine production capacity that we needed. And by December of 2020, we were able to have multi-billion dose per year capacity. So we have a really unique opportunity right now to use mRNA vaccines, those exact advantages, to further scale and really vaccinate the world in close to 6 months. And another added advantage of mRNA vaccines are not only that they're extremely safe and effective, but that the production technology, that the actual commercial scale production, can rapidly switch to make vaccines that target a new variant. So, the world really lucked out in the fact that we found 2 vaccines and maybe possibly 3 vaccines that use this mRNA technology that is the exact right technology that we have for this pandemic. And the only thing that we need to do now is choose to make more of them. And I think that's really what we need to come out of this sort of briefing. If there's one message I would like to tell to everyone, is that the current vaccine shortages that we have are a choice. The millions of deaths that we've seen since the first mRNA vaccine was administered is a choice. We could today be on a pathway to make enough vaccines to vaccinate the entire world, but we are choosing not to. And that is really, I think, the overwhelming message that we need to get across today.
Thanks so much, James. Zain Rizvi, a public citizen. So if that's the case, if it's a choice, whether to make or not make mRNA, then if we choose to make it, how can we make enough quickly? How can we make enough quickly enough to make a difference in this pandemic and provide vaccine access to people around the world?
It's a great question, and I think to underscore one point, when the first dose was administered of the Pfizer vaccine in the UK, there had been 1.6 million reported deaths from the pandemic. 1.6 million reported deaths. Of course, undercount, et cetera, but 1.6 million reported deaths. In the 6 months since that date, we have seen an additional 2 million reported deaths. And so the pandemic, despite the approval of these safe and effective vaccines, is actually spiraling out of control. And so it underscores the urgency of mRNA vaccines. So in our report, we worked with Imperial College engineers to really describe what it would take to produce 8 billion doses within 1 year. So for 6 months, we assumed it would take to set up the facilities, and it would another 6 months to actually pump out the 8 billion doses required. And so one instructive example here is to just look at what the companies themselves have been doing on a much smaller scale. So you take the example of BioNTech, for example, which is a partner in the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. BioNTech bought a facility in Marburg, a small town in Germany, that had, it was a small facility that had no experience. The 300 staff at the facility had no experience in mRNA vaccine production. They bought that facility in November. And over the next 6 months, they retrofitted that facility, they trained the staff, they got the necessary regulatory approvals, and they started commercial vaccine production. So all it took was 6 months to really transform this facility and get it to start producing billions of doses. So the first part of our report really talks about what the precise steps are required to do the technology transfer, to do the process validation, to get into the startup phase of commercial vaccine production. And then the second part of our report really uses what's called computational process modeling, which sounds really wonky, and it is a little bit wonky. But the idea here is to use process engineering software to estimate what would it take in terms of resources required. So we looked at the number of facilities, we looked at the amounts of raw ingredients, we looked at the labor requirements, we looked at the costs involved, and we did this analysis for the 3 different kinds of mRNA vaccines that had either been approved so far, or authorized rather, or who look promising. So this includes the NIH Mrna vaccine, this includes the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and finally this includes the CureVac vaccine. So I'll summarize the results for the NIH Mrna vaccine here. But what we found was it would take about 55 production lines to produce 8 billion doses within 6 months. So, and it would take approximately 800 kilograms of mRNA, which would require about 4,000 personnel working on this, and about 10,000 production batches. I think, these numbers seem difficult to conceptualize at one point, but one way to understand this is that this is perhaps the most devastating pandemic we have seen in over 100 years at this point. This is a global crisis of unparalleled magnitude, and yet there is an extraordinary gap between what rich countries are willing to do and to put up and what it will take to end the pandemic. And so I hope that our plan and similar plans that have been put out by Prep for All and the great work by Resolve to Save Lives really shows that there is a different way, that a different way is possible, and that we can do this. And we can do this because we've seen it done on a smaller scale. Now we just need rich countries like the G7 countries to really step up and deliver and help end this pandemic.
All of us and many others have been advocating to decision makers in the United States around the world that the investment is worth it. And what we often hear back, of course, is, well, show us the production capacity. We're trying to solve this problem. At least technical advisors in various governments feel like they are trying to solve this problem. So what are the missing elements there, Zane, if you would? And let's help people visualize this a bit. When we talk about 55 production lines, we're talking about retrofitting existing facilities, right? And we feel that there are many potential facilities that could serve that purpose around the world.
Yeah, exactly. I think, James has really described well the advantages of mRNA technology. And one of the key advantages is just the small scale nature of the process. So mRNA really does represent almost, you could say, a revolution in vaccinology, because typically vaccines are made in these giant vats, right? Like you can imagine these 2,000 liter massive bioreactors. And what mRNA vaccine production is actually highly productive. And so what this means is that you can do this in much smaller bioreactors. Think about something like 30 liters or 35 liters. And so one of the advantages of this small scale nature of this process is that you can actually fit multiple processes within a facility. And you can actually get, in some cases, these smaller processes can be more productive than the entire facility itself. And so what we envision is 55 production lines installed in 14 facilities. So that's about 3 production lines per facility. And it's also worth emphasizing that the sealed nature of the mRNA process. So it adds another advantage. Because it is sealed, there are potential advantages here when it comes to clean rooms and the level of regulatory requirements that may be associated with mRNA production. So there's a lot more that can be done, particularly when it comes to mRNA vaccines in scaling up production and tapping into existing capacity. And the final thing I'll conclude on here is that we know this is true because we've also seen enormous demand from the countries themselves, right? Like the World Health Organization has set up what it calls the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub. And we've seen, for example, more than a dozen countries have said they want to be able to produce mRNA vaccines. And yet the key critical gap that is still missing is the technology itself, that we need the companies to share the vaccine recipe, to share the know-how, to share the intellectual property, and to help ramp up production all over the world.
Thank you, Zain. A reminder to attendees and journalists that you can raise your hand and ask questions of our mRNA experts and of Congresswoman Jayapal, who will be joining us shortly. Maureen, if I may, so with Resolve to Save Lives, Zain describes global interest in production. There's interest, of course, in vaccine access as soon as possible. There's also interest and an ongoing global conversation with the World Health Organization, with Gates Foundation and others, Africa CDC, John Nkengasong, who's been on our program previously, to establish mRNA production for the world, looking at sort of a medium to long-term timeline so that each region of the world has self-sufficiency and is prepared to act quickly against upcoming threats. What do you see as the key impediments to action? What are you asking the U.S. government and other leaders to do?
Many thanks, Peter. I think it's really the question at hand. What the setup that we have today, where we're expecting countries to keep depending on the goodwill of high-income countries whose own interest will always prevail, and or the promises of existing manufacturers who will always serve the shareholders before they share the public, I think is unsustainable, and that's why we're seeing, which is why we've been thinking through, working on the notion of regional mRNA vaccine hubs around the world. Think one in Asia, one in Latin America, one in Africa, which could be places that actually produce the mRNA vaccines, but also places where manufacturers from low and middle income country could come and learn how to set up manufacturing with hands-on tech transfer from companies. What that would do is really allow to move from the current models where an originator is transferring one-to-one to a model where you can transfer from one to many, from a closed system to an open system, to a system where you would diversify production nodes to build redundancy and to avoid single point failures of the kind that we've seen recently. So really try to think in a much broader fashion, and in one that would really build the ground for a collective insurance going forward. Because we know that the mRNA technology that has been very well described by Zain and James is also one that has the potential to protect us against future threats. Not only the current threat of COVID under its particular form, but against future variants, and also against known threats that we haven't been able to confront properly yet. Think dengue, Lassa, polio, malaria, possibly even HIV or cancer for that matter. And then things, other threats we don't know yet, but that could lend themselves to being addressed through the mRNA platform. So that platform is really our collective health insurance going forward. And what COVID-19 has done is really to validate mRNA as a scientific approach and build, in a sense, a not yet vast enough, but hopefully soon vast enough manufacturing network for this brand new technology around the world. So we need governments, we need donors to actually invest in sharing mRNA technology and in using both the lever that they have on the financial side and on the political side to make this happen in the medium run so that we can start as soon as possible decentralizing production, start manufacturing in diverse regions, and prepare ourselves also for the next pandemic and the next threat.
Thank you, Maureen. And our thesis today, I believe from Public Citizen, is that we can link that longer-term plan to the urgent need of the moment, and we can deliver a plan. We think world leaders are capable, that there are resources available capable of delivering billions of doses to people timely to end the pandemic and establishing the medium term. James Krellenstein, Prep for All. Last week, President Biden, Jeff Zients, the COVID coordinator, and President Biden issued a statement describing the U.S. government's next contributions to the pandemic. The U.S. government, of course, has supported a temporary waiver of intellectual property at the World Trade Organization, has committed 80 million doses in excess U.S. supply to the global response. What is missing? What are you asking for? What are you seeing from the Biden administration at this time?
Well, I have to say, I obviously supported President Biden. I voted for him, but I would be dishonest if I did not just say that President Biden's response has been completely inadequate to the scale that we need. Donating 80 million doses is, as a colleague once put it, like treating a machete wound with a Band-Aid. And the fact is that what we are in right now is one of the most serious public health crises of the last century. And we need to basically be talking about rapid scale up of production capacity. There simply is not right now enough mRNA vaccine production capacity anywhere in the world. We're using 100% of it. And what we need is the Biden administration, along with other world leaders, to put the funding up and to put the political will up to scale vaccine production as fast as possible. Already, the United States Congress has allocated over $16 billion to the Biden administration for vaccine production activities. They spent almost none of that amount of money. As Zane and Public Citizen has estimated, the actual total cost of probably both building the facilities, doing the licensing, actually doing some of the tech transfer activities, and actually buying the doses for 8 billion doses would be at $25 billion. We estimate that just making the facilities would only cost $4 billion. When we look at the cost that is going to be incurred by the world by not bringing COVID-19 under control, we're talking about trillions of dollars of economic loss. And so this is the best investment that we could possibly make right now, which is that we need the Biden administration to step up and stop putting its head in the sand and actually start responding to this global crisis. I have to say, right now, not only is the Biden administration allowing millions of people, billions of people's lives to be threatened around the world, they are threatening American biosecurity as well. I sit here in Brooklyn. As Maureen said, I went to a movie last week, because I am vaccinated. That world that we are all living in right now is under threat by the continuous spread of COVID-19 around the world, which could allow variants that could defeat the vaccines that protect me today to start spreading here in the United States. So what's going on at the Biden administration's level is just completely inexplicable. And I think we all have the obligation, and it's a sort of moral imperative for us to force our government to start actually dealing with this problem with a seriousness.
So part of what's needed is investment, and we and others have produced cost estimates. As James said, it's relatively low capital investment to retrofit facilities and get started. But there's another dimension, is there not? There's a dimension of political leadership to catalyze further action around the world. There's an element of the World Health Organization can't necessarily sit across the table from Pfizer and say, here is what we expect. But we think other political leaders can catalyze that action and have authority under law to act, right? And Zane, would you care to comment?
Yeah, sure. So the Defense Production Act is an extraordinarily powerful law, and thus far it has not been utilized in all the ways it can be to rapidly expand vaccine production. So one helpful example of this is that the Defense Production Act, for example, allows the U.S. government to allocate materials. And if you look at the definition of materials, this includes technical information. And so the idea here is that if the companies are unwilling to share their know-how, if the companies are unwilling to share the knowledge that can help end the pandemic around the world and get us back to normal, then the U.S. government clearly has the authority and really the moral imperative to step in and say, we need you to share this technology. We need you to share this recipe. We need you to share this know-how. And so there are multiple provisions in the Defense Production Act, so including this allocation authority I mentioned. There's also the prioritization authority that can be used to require a company accepts a contract. So just like Moderna entered into a deal with Lonza, President Biden can say, Moderna, you have to enter into a deal with X, Y, and Z manufacturer. The Defense Production Act offers a pathway really out of this pandemic. And when you think about it, it is, more than 500,000 Americans have died from COVID-19. It is an unprecedented threat to American national security. And it speaks to the urgency of utilizing every possible lever here to end the pandemic as quickly as possible.
And just to add a little bit to what Zane just said, I think one of the things that we all need to remember is that these vaccines benefited from massive infusions of public money, billions of dollars of public money. In the case of NIH, Moderna, literally to build the factories that produce these vaccines. And actually for the NIH vaccine, for the Moderna vaccine, the actual vaccine was co-developed with the United States government. It was a collaboration between the National Institutes of Health and Moderna. And what we really do need to see, once again, the Biden administration to stand up is not just use the DPA, which is a really powerful sort of Swiss Army knife, but to also use the U.S. government's unique interests that they have. They own patents that protect these vaccines, as an example, to really force these companies. We need both carrots and sticks to get companies like Moderna, companies like Pfizer to the negotiating table so that we rapidly see global production scale up to basically, save millions of lives. And I just want to add, since President Biden has come into office, 1.5 million people, more than 1.5 million people, have died from COVID-19. Right now, that number is set to grow and start growing rapidly as this virus continues to spread unabated around most of the world. And I just cannot believe that a U.S. president in 2021 is going to put his head in the sand and not do anything while we watch a global crisis continue to worsen.
Maureen?
Peter, if I can jump in, the best time to have started transferring technology would have been months ago. The next best time is now. And I think it would be collectively delusional to think that the current sets of solutions that we have will be enough. So I think what the report of Public Citizen have shown is that it is actually feasible, that there is a pathway to building a capacity rapidly. And I think too much time has been spent debating how and why it could not be done, how and why there were not enough mature sites, why it would be too complex or too complicated, why we should wait for the end of this pandemic to actually think about transferring mRNA. And I think that's where our frame needs to change. The second best time is now. We need to start technology transfer for mRNA vaccines as soon as possible.
Thank you, Maureen. Zane, last word to you. Could you once more lay out the timeline for getting this done, for making enough vaccine for the world?
Sure. So we are currently, it is June 8th. It would take approximately 6 months to retrofit facilities, 14 production facilities with 55 production lines. And after those 6 months, we could get 8 billion doses produced within 6 months. So right now it is June. What we are saying is by June 2022, you could essentially help end the pandemic. The status quo means that the pandemic may go on for years longer and cause untold suffering. And so this is the fastest way out of the pandemic, and we need President Biden to act.
And that would be at six months from now, doses would start rolling offline and could be delivered. Those first months, just briefly, that would be spent retrofitting the facilities, training the staff, other key aspects.
Yeah, exactly. It would be spent training the staff, retrofitting facilities, installing the necessary equipment, getting the appropriate regulatory approvals, and doing the process validation as needed for these different sites. And we know this can be done because we've seen the companies do it themselves when they want to. And now we just need the U.S. government to push them to do this on a much larger scale.
Thanks so much. Zain Rizvi, law and policy researcher with Public Citizen. The report is How to Make Enough Vaccine for the World in a Year. Marine Bussanier with Resolve to Save Lives. Thanks so much for joining us. James Krellenstein with Prep for All. Thank you all for contributing your expertise. And if journalists have questions, you may put them in the chat. We are honored to be joined now by Representative Pramila Jayapal, representing Washington State, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and leader of a recent letter with many colleagues to President Biden, calling for a more ambitious response from the United States to the global pandemic, calling for the urgent manufacturing that you've just heard our experts discuss, and also co-leader of legislation introduced just this morning, I believe, with Representative Krishnamurthy, calling for the same among other programs, establishing a U.S. response coordinator now and for future pandemic threats. Representative Jayapal, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to be with you this morning on this very, very important topic.
It's been 6 months since the U.S. and other wealthy countries started rolling out the vaccine. Where is the world going to be, in your estimation, in the next 6 months if we don't ramp up equitable vaccine distribution globally, starting today?
Well, at a time in which wealthy countries have administered more than 80% of global vaccines, while low-income countries have received just 0.3%, it's a stunning statistic. This effort is critical to ensuring more equitable access. And I think the Biden administration has taken some initial good steps, though I would say they took longer than I would have wanted. I still think there's a lot of work to be done to save lives and to ameliorate the effects of COVID-19 worldwide. There are many reasons to engage immediately and aggressively in showing strong leadership and helping to vaccinate the world. From a pure public health perspective, if we are to defeat the virus, we cannot continue to allow the daily surges that we're seeing globally, because the virus knows no geographic bounds and public health of Americans is at risk. But there's also obviously a humanitarian and economic set of incentives for the United States to show strong leadership here. The implications of a needlessly prolonged, years-long global pandemic are dire. If we do nothing, or if we do too little, we will continue to see these explosive surges of infections and deaths that we're seeing now in India and Brazil. We're going to see it everywhere, as well as the spread of new highly infectious variants. And not only will many more hundreds of thousands of people die from COVID-19, but tens of millions will experience increased poverty, hunger, and instability. Final reason for us to really engage aggressively and urgently is that as the United States embarks on the difficult task of rebuilding our global reputation following the past 4 disastrous years, this is a prime opportunity for the United States to build diplomatic relationships with countries around the world and show that America is ready to lead again, that we are ready to be a part of a global coalition that takes care of countries around the world and helps to contribute to building real capacity for public health interventions around the world, not just for this pandemic, but for whatever might follow. So we all know that that's the case because of the numbers, but I do want to just bring a personal element in here. I have seen this firsthand myself. Obviously, I worked in public health for 10 years, global public health for 10 years around the world, 20 years before I came to Congress. So I have that personal understanding, but I also have parents that live in India Both my parents got COVID. It was right at the beginning of the surge, and I saw the public health crisis in India firsthand. I will tell you that had they gotten COVID even a week later, I'm not sure that my dad, who's 90 years old, and my mom, who's 80 years old, would have even been able to get oxygen. My dad needed remdesivir. They both needed to be hospitalized. I'm not sure any of that would have happened. And I think every single one of us, as proud first and only South Asian American woman to serve in the United States Congress, I can tell you that every one of us with relatives and friends in India, there isn't a day that goes by that we haven't lost somebody else that's close to us. So yes, this is personal, but it's also political, and it's also about the United States' role in the world. So I think the key lesson here is a global pandemic is not over until it's over everywhere. And at the heart of our effort to vaccinate the world has to be a powerful recognition that whether you live in America or anywhere else, your future is intertwined with mine, and that we're all better off when we're all better off.
Thank you so much for those powerful words. It's heartbreaking, and it's a profound test of our morality and humanity, our ability to meet the global challenge. You recently sent a strong letter with more than 40 of your colleagues to President Biden, calling for, among other things, a $25 billion investment in new urgent manufacturing to provide vaccine access for the world, as well as provisions on special drawing rights. What do you think what more do you think the president should be doing? What more do you think the U.S. government can do to address the pandemic?
Well, I've been speaking to the Biden administration, the most senior levels of the Biden administration over the last couple of months, actually, really pushing to have a series of steps that I think can help us to address this worldwide pandemic. And so this letter was the latest. Actually, the legislation today is the latest, but the letter was an attempt to really put all of that into writing in terms of my conversations with the Biden administration around the steps we need to take. So that letter that I led, I'm very proud of that letter because I think it is both a short-term, a medium-term, and a longer-term look at how we address this. So we sent the letter ahead of the G7 summit, but we sent it, as I mentioned, at a moment where we see this deep inequity in how vaccines have been distributed. We were originally pushing through the Progressive Caucus, which I chair, the support of the TRIPS temporary waiver for COVID-19 vaccines at the WTO. And we were happy to get that success. That was led by a number of progressive colleagues of mine. And the Progressive Caucus really pushed that. But that obviously is a longer term solution. We still have to get the approval from other countries, and it will take time to do that. Now, in addition to that, we then started pushing for committing doses that we already have in the United States to send to other countries. That is the quickest way to address some of the immediate short-term needs. It's not sufficient. But that is why you've now seen the Biden administration committing to a total of 80 million doses of FDA-authorized COVID vaccines, and we were pushing to make sure that they got those doses out. And you saw that last week, prior to G7, they announced that these doses will be sent out before July 4th, first set of 20 million immediately. So our letter calls for looking at even more doses that we could free up here in the United States instead of sitting on our doses that we're not using. Let's send them out immediately because we do need an immediate response. But then in terms of the medium term and the long term strategy, we are pushing the White House to pursue these additional steps. What are they? They are, first, I mentioned release of the existing doses that we might have. Second, investing an additional $25 billion in the Build Back Better agenda to authorize BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authorization, to oversee the production of an additional 8 billion vaccine doses. That would be sufficient to vaccinate half the world. And it's also one of the quickest ways I think we can see to increase the immediate supply of vaccines globally. And we want to make sure that the remainder of the 16 million that we put into the American Rescue Plan funds that are allocated for COVID-19 vaccines also get accounted for and then deployed towards this production. Then we also urge all available tools of U.S. influence. That's persuasion, it's diplomacy, it's legal authorities that can help facilitate the rapid and widespread transfer of technology and expansion of vaccine production, including directing the NIH to participate in WHO's COVID-19 Technology Access Pool program. The United States can help negotiate and secure vaccine licensing agreements with existing manufacturers to enable broad sharing of that technology and the processes to scale up production. I'll tell you, I was speaking to the Indian ambassador, who I speak to pretty regularly, and the South African ambassador, actually. And there are places in India that are ready to go to work in actually producing these vaccines, but they do need those vaccine licensing agreements. And of course, they were very supportive of the TRIPS waiver and pushed that strategy as well. We're also calling on the president to support a new issuance of special drawing rights, because those SDRs will help strengthen public health budgets worldwide and provide low-income countries with resources to import medical supplies and carry out vaccination campaigns, while at the same time guaranteeing support through the State Department, USAID, WHO, UNICEF, and other agencies, so that those developing countries can help build their health infrastructure. You know, one of the things I spoke to the White House about is that there are some countries like India where we can just send the vaccines, and we're pretty confident that the Indian government has the infrastructure in place to get those vaccines out and into the arms of Indians everywhere. But there are other countries in Africa and Latin America where that health infrastructure doesn't exist. And this is both a short-term, a medium-term, and a long-term issue for us to help build that health infrastructure to administer vaccines, both for this crisis and down the road. Finally, we've asked the White House to convene a global vaccine summit with world leaders that can spur cooperation and coordination in the development, production, and distribution of vaccines. That hopefully would also encourage research, transparency, open access, and global collaboration in engineering and manufacturing, with a goal of accelerating universal vaccination. So I think these are a number of the steps that we think we need to take. And the bill that we introduced this morning that I introduced with Representative Krishnamurthy, called the Nullifying Opportunities for Variants to Infect and Decimate Act, or NOVID Act, would do all of these things. It would really establish a comprehensive strategy and coordinated interagency pandemic preparedness and response program to end the COVID-19 pandemic.
Outstanding. We strongly support you in these efforts and are deeply appreciative of them. The no-bid legislation also calls for the rapid expansion of manufacturing capacity to make billions of doses and end the pandemic. And it strikes us that U.S. leadership in this area has the potential to be transformative, not only for our government's capacity to invest, but also as a political signifier and for the ability of the president to ask more, for example, of pharmaceutical companies than they have been asked to give thus far in the pandemic, transferring technology, for example, as you mentioned. What do you think, we're experiencing a moment in this country now where many of us are beginning to feel a bit safer, are beginning to be able to plan for our families. And of course, that comes with the risk of not appreciating the depth of the continuing threat to our own safety, but also the suffering of people around the world. What do you think we can do to help motivate your colleagues, and what can other elected officials do to amplify this call, to work with you and other leaders to ensure that our government puts forward the strongest possible response and uses all the tools at its disposal to end the pandemic worldwide as quickly as possible? And may I say also for attendees, please prepare your questions for Congresswoman Jayapal.
Well, I think, we've seen that. I mean, when it's just the natural arc of how things happen in this country, when the surge started happening in India, it was front page news every day, the funeral pyres. It was very much on people's minds. And I think it has faded now from people's minds. And for some of us, it has not, because we are deeply connected. And I think there are a lot of people in the United States who are actually deeply connected to other parts of the world. And so I hope that that provides some impetus from a humanitarian perspective, but also from a self-interested perspective. And so the most important thing, I think, is to continue help us to build the momentum and the pressure on the United States to act. Like I said, I think the president is in the right place. I was really hoping for, and still am hoping for, some sort of an announcement at the G7 around these issues. I was very pleased to see the follow-up on the release of the doses, but it's got to be a steady drumbeat, because this does fade from U.S. kind of vision, if you will. Peripheral vision sort of becomes smaller and smaller as people start to feel healthier and start to feel like the virus is not an issue here in the United States. Contact your lawmaker, your Congress member, ask them to co-sponsor our bill, and also continue these kinds of events where we're educating the public. I hope journalists continue to write about these issues, because they're not gone. And what we're seeing is more and more research on these variants and how they are adapting, as viruses always do, to the body, so that they actually are invisible to the body for some period of time, and then that allows them to spread with even greater efficiency, if you will, once they're embedded in your system. So I think the research has to continue, and actually the NOVID Act that we just introduced also includes, authorizes $500 million to establish a global disease surveillance network to prevent against future pandemics. So I think to make sure that it stays central to our attention, whatever the reasons are that people may have, humanitarian, self-interest, global leadership, all of those reasons are there, to talk to your communities about it and to get the news out and continue to help us to build that pressure for the United States to play this leadership role that we have been advocating.
Thank you. I'd like to open it to questions. Our first question is from James Krellenstein. He's one of our congressmen. He's one of our mRNA production experts. He's the co-founder of a group called Prep for All that has been very active in calling for an urgent manufacturing response to the pandemic. James?
I don't believe I can start my video, but thank you, first of all, Representative, for sponsoring the NOVID legislation. I mean, it's so important, and I just cannot thank you enough for your leadership on this. But one of the things that we're a little bit perplexed by is that in the ARPA, in the sort of American relief package that was passed back in March, there is over $16 billion that was passed as part of for vaccine manufacturing and drug or PPE manufacturing. And one of the things that we've sort of been tracking is almost none of that money has been spent yet. And as Zane and our group and Public Citizen has demonstrated, $16 billion is probably more than enough for the capital expenses that we would need to actually start mRNA production for the entire world. So do you have any insight into why the administration is not spending that money yet, given the threat to our health?
Yeah, you'll notice in our letter that we sent, we specifically referenced that $16 billion, and we asked for that to immediately be accounted for and utilized for exactly the purpose you're mentioning. And I think that there was a lot of money in the American Rescue Plan, and obviously it's taken some time to get those dollars out. And I will say that I think, understandably, perhaps the Biden administration's focus was on manufacturing sufficient vaccines and buying sufficient vaccines to vaccinate the United States population. And that's, I think, the progress that we've made on that front has allowed some space to open up in the administration to start to deal with it elsewhere. It is an unfortunate truth that if we hadn't dealt with it here in the United States and we started focusing on the rest of the world, there would have been political fallout from that. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying that's the reality. We've been pushing, obviously, for this since the American Rescue Plan, recognizing that it's a global situation. So I believe that they are now focused on where that $16 billion is, how much of it has been used, how much of it is unspent, and then that would go towards the $25 billion that Public Citizen and others have called for and that we have called for. I also believe that they are looking at this in terms of number of doses required rather than a dollar amount, because one of the things I think we should do, and I believe the White House agrees, is to make sure we're getting the lowest possible price. I mean, you mentioned actually, I think it was Peter who mentioned the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, this is one of the big problems that we have, right? You know, I'm focused on lowering prescription drugs more broadly, but this is one of the big problems that we have. A lot of times it's the government that invests in these new drugs, and then we pay top dollar prices for those drugs when they're desperately needed around the world. So I do believe that the Biden administration is thinking about this in terms of how do we get the most efficient bang for our buck with lower prices and more doses. And so they're thinking about it in terms of total number of doses. So hopefully, James, will have an accounting of that 16 billion very quickly. It's been one of the things I've been emphasizing in my private conversations with the White House as well.
Thank you. Our next question is from Emily Kopp with Roll Call. Emily?
Hi. How are you thinking about the EU's opposition to the TRIPS waiver, and what is the White House saying about how that impacts their plans to increase vaccine supply abroad?
Well, the White House has been very committed to the TRIPS waiver since they came out in support of it. And I got very clear signals that very clear recommitment to that TRIPS waiver, and that the United States will do everything that it can to push that despite the EU's opposition. So I feel very good about that. And I will just say that, that was the incredible effort of a number of Progressive Caucus members who got on board with that, pushing early for that, getting the speaker on board, and really pushing the White House. We had a meeting with Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo and the CPC the Progressive Caucus Executive Board in the lead up to that. And, really that was one of our top priorities to discuss with her. And so we do feel like the White House is very strong on that. And yet, that this is a process that will involve a global coalition, and anything like that, as I discussed with the South African ambassador and the Indian ambassador, takes time, something we don't really have, which is why we're pushing for these other mechanisms as well to address this issue in the short term. So I do believe the White House is strongly committed to supporting the TRIPS waiver and helping to build the global agreement that we will need in order to move that waiver forward.
Emily, any follow-up? And we'd like to invite questions from other attendees.
No follow-up. Thank you so much for the question.
Okay, thank you. Congresswoman Jayapal, do you have any concluding thoughts for us?
Well, let me first of all just thank Public Citizen and this entire coalition of people, the researchers, the journalists that are tracking this and keeping it in the forefront of our attention for what you're doing. I cannot tell you how deeply important this is to the world. And having worked all over the world in public health, all over Africa, Latin America, India, having family directly in India, and now being in the United States Congress, one of the things that COVID has made very clear is how interdependent we are. We can talk about, we can fight against all the ways in which borders are being defined. Viruses don't do that. They never have. They never will. And I think it is really important for us to also think about building longer-term capacity in hubs around the world. This is something that I spoke to the White House about as well. There is a real opportunity in South Africa, or perhaps other countries, the African Union can decide to build hubs where we can do the research, development, and manufacture and production of critical elements like vaccines and other things that we will need to fight viruses and pandemics worldwide. And I think we need to start thinking about that. India is obviously another place where we can do that. And then those hubs can function to quickly ensure vaccine equity early. I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing is we're focused on vaccine equity, but it's very late in the process. And had we been focused on this early, where there was a network that could immediately jump into action, and obviously we needed the vaccines and the technology, but could immediately have jumped into action, we would potentially be in a very different place. So I am trying to think about, and I know everyone on this call will, continue to focus on short, medium, and long-term strategies, because this is going to be about more than just a single waiver for this episode or even the supply of vaccines around this particular moment in time. We are going to see more of these viruses developing. We have to be prepared. And I'm very grateful to everybody on this call for keeping the attention very clearly on short, medium, and long-term strategies.
And we are grateful for your leadership, Congresswoman Jayapal. You know, for Public Citizens' part, we're also grateful for the White House's commitment to pursue a negotiation of the TRIPS waiver. We certainly call for a speedy, broad resolution of those negotiations, and grateful for the initial commitment of doses from the White House. But as you and others have suggested, it's nowhere near what's needed. You know, the world right now, we see a couple of real dangers in some of the global decision making. One is a tendency to accept the production estimates that have been put out as being sufficient, that on current production estimates we will vaccinate the world by the end of next year, perhaps. We think there's reason to question that, and that it's an awfully dangerous bet to make with potentially millions of lives at stake. Similarly, the idea that urgent manufacturing can't be done, we think is wrong. And so the report that we've just released, How to Make Enough Vaccine for the World in 1 Year, aims to counter that. So we're very eager to work together with you and with others on this call and with everyone who is watching to see some real U.S. leadership in establishing urgent manufacturing for the United States and for the world, for vaccines for everyone, everywhere, both to end this pandemic and to build a bridge for the future so the world is more resilient against the next pandemic. So thank you again, Congresswoman Jayapal, Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, first South Asian American woman elected to Congress. Thank you for the NOVID Act. Thank you for your letter to President Biden. And thanks to our panelists, our mRNA experts, for being with us today. We'll see you on the next installment of Global Newsmakers in the Age of COVID.